This video contains plot and thematic spoilers for the following: Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go, the first season of Final Space, Saint Elsewhere, Herbert West Reanimator, From Beyond, In the Mouth of Madness, Bloodborne, Darkest Dungeon, Uzumaki, and DC's Johnny Sorrow. Let me fill you in on my first interactions with the cultural serial dilution of the works of H.P. Lovecraft, as That Is Not Dead Can Eternal Lie. This show had lots of themes which continuously crop up in Lovecraft's work. Ancient civilizations, especially those cultivated in the midst of an unknowable evil, the greater anima mundi which connects living things together, the fear of loss of the mind or bodily autonomy, but most importantly, the two concepts explored in the series: the sense of scale of the cosmos and the looming sense of dread, the mad murmurings of impending doom from the unreliable doomsayer desperately wishing to forget. Absolutely bizarre to come from a supposed kids show, but something about animation lends itself so well to adaptations of cosmic horror. Perhaps being unfettered by budgets or being allowed to veer deeply into the uncanny valley, animation occasionally comes close to the beautiful and perturbing sides of the cosmos. In Final Space, there is a lovely contrast between the cosmic backgrounds and stellar planet designs and the degeneration of the High Commander, the host to knowledge and power beyond comprehension, that which chews the flesh and gnaws the mind. It is almost tragic, but the absolute pinnacle of the show's cosmic horror manifests with the Titans. Super ancient, massive organisms whose motivation and existence are beyond our comprehension. The sheer scale and might is demonstrated when one plucks the earth as if it were an orange. There's a special horror which can only exist with the proof of powerlessness, the realization of insignificance in relation to the span of reality. Your life existing only as an infinitesimal moment in the unknowable eons. Your stature no greater than atoms when compared to the 50,000 light-year diameter of the Milky Way galaxy. Your whole life, as well as every person you could conceivably interact with, as well as every living thing that is, will, or ever existed as a figment of a blind idiot god, with all reality ceasing without warning one day. Perhaps there is a little Azathoth in the end to the show Saint Elsewhere. But moving from the small to the silver screen, a few of my favorite films borrow heavily from the works of H.P. Lovecraft. There was a more or less direct adaptation of the short stories Herbert West Reanimator, abbreviated to just Reanimator, and From Beyond, with the original title being preserved. Reanimator is largely Lovecraft's retelling of the creature of Frankenstein, the creator-creation dynamic, grappling with taboos and the desecration of life. It is interesting to note that at some level, the souls of all people, as well as the soul of an individual bound to the flesh of the body, are connected. This exact connection is never elaborated upon, but the independent movement of appendages disjoint from the central nervous system, or even disconnected from the body altogether, is a detail seen in the original short story. Following the success of Reanimator, the production staff went on to create From Beyond. From Beyond imparts such a sense of lasting dread upon completion, knowing that the air is filled with invisible monsters drawn to electrical impulses, and that the modern world is becoming more and more enticing to those fiends which lurk just outside of view. There is also an attempt at portraying something beyond our ability to observe. The last section of the film is color-corrected pink, and this comes directly from the book, as, upon activating the pineal gland, the characters can see infrared light, represented to our eyes with pink. There is a certain beauty and horror in the pineal gland awakening. Beyond the shock of disfigurement, the dark side of transcendence, as Dr. Pretorius falls to his shadow and is consumed by the monsters within his psyche. Instead of expanding consciousness, tunneling ever inward to unleash new and exotic horrors as the body becomes warped and twisted. Perhaps this is what 46 and 2 chromosomes really entail. Finally, In the Mouth of Madness is the last film adaptation I will mention, as it is my personal favorite. Truly an exciting and perturbing experience when going in blind. But for those having seen the film or who enjoy spoilers, I will give you my bit of insight. There is the trope of an unreliable narrator, with a framework story employed to establish the presumed insanity of the narrator, and with an ending to confirm all his worst nightmares. Again, there is a sense of unimportance, that inescapable causality determines all action, that there is a certain meaninglessness to life, but also that there exists comedy in the absurdity. As the main character watches the film he sat down for, with us, and he laughs the maniacal cackle, as it is written, and as he gladly performs. There is a relinquishing of agency that permeates the final scene, but that cannot really exist in an interactive medium like games. I felt rather clever noticing that the Seaslug quest line in RuneScape bears a striking resemblance to the Shadow over Innsmouth story, but my unparalleled deduction was deflated on realizing that an NPC in the region is named Ezekiel Lovecraft, a rather obvious clue that I missed. Speaking of Innsmouth, there is a direct adaptation of Innsmouth in the Call of Cthulhu game, but it doesn't really capture the right experience. Although, I would say that Bloodborne and Darkest Dungeon fit right into that niche. Bloodborne is the spiritual successor to Dark Souls, from the same software studio. Dark Souls was dark fantasy, taking heavy inspiration from Berserk, to the extent that Artorias the Abysswalker seems to be modeled after the protagonist Guts. Bloodborne draws initially from Victorian horror, with the Yarnamites exuberantly partaking in the hunt to purge monsters. Although, the monsters' ranks seem to grow as their forces diminish. It brings to mind the Nietzsche quote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back into you." As the hunters eventually devolve into the monsters they abhor, there is another quote that springs to mind though, this time from Berserk. Guts is told that he is sharpening a sword in a pool of blood, that the more he sharpens, the more it rusts. A self-defeating cycle at Guts' detriment. Perhaps it is just the connection with blood, a word and substance which saturates Bloodborne, but the connection may be substantiated with the similarity between the brand and the blood symbol. The destructive cycle ends with a choice: to succumb to the animal instincts to be put down by another hunter, or to transcend the cycle and become a higher life form. There may exist a minor faux pas in being able to overcome the corrupting influence and transcend, but perhaps Darkest Dungeon had a better ending. The game is by Red Hook, the studio's name a reference to the short story which involved an ancient idol and kidnapping. Makes you wonder how so many new recruits find their way to the hamlet, especially given the high mortality rate. The game is brutally difficult, from managing stress to unfair fights to instill a sense of disempowerment. Perhaps none stronger than on the final boss, where you are twice forced to sacrifice a character to the Heart of Darkness, and, should you defeat it, you are not left with reassurance, but only a delayed sense of dread. You have not killed the most horrible thing, only left it to reemerge later. But worse yet, you're confronted with the realization that the most horrible thing is the progenitor of life, that which instills sapience, but also madness in men.
All the decadent horrors I have seen pale in comparison to that final, crowning thing. I could not look. nor could I look away.
The dulcet tone, despite palpable fear and anguish. Wayne June lends his voice as the narrator in Darkest Dungeon. But for other Lovecraft-crazed audiophiles, Graham Plowman is my favorite neoclassical composer. Although Metallica might have produced a Call of Cthulhu callback track, Plowman continuously dazzles with a melange of terror and intrigue, the call of discovery, and those horrors better left undiscovered. The poetry alongside musical accompaniment is haunting, but I think the instrumental tracks are breathtaking. I would be remiss if I did not mention Jungi Ito, and specifically his work Uzumaki, which hits on quite a few of the Lovecraft tropes and themes. Spiral into Horror is probably a topic for another video, as it presents horror from nearly every conceivable axis, from evolutionary fear centered around danger and disgust, to cultural fear predicated on Malthusianism, and psychological terror manifesting in paranoia and body horror. There is a cosmic horror too, examining the depths of space and the degradation of linear time. But perhaps the strongest imagery in Uzumaki exists in the perversion of nature, of dissettling imagery which could exist in theory, but in the context of our world just leads to a terrible, uncanny feeling. Uzumaki is a masterpiece. But for those comic fans of the old gods, DC has a particularly perturbing interpretation. Johnny Sorrow is a man displaced in time and dimension, his body long since ravaged by forces unimaginable, reborn in a rather innocuous vessel, with one distinguishing feature. Instead of a head, a floating mask with neutral expression floats just above his suit. Although the imagery may be a bit unsettling on its own, what is hidden behind the mask is beyond terrible. For those which look behind the mask are confronted with a vision of something grotesque beyond measure, and ultimately succumb to the purest form of fear, dying instantly. This power is not the work of normal sorcery, but the gift given by the King of Tears, an incorporeal entity somewhere outside of our existence, who is waiting, biding time, and readying for the conquest of another realm. These are some of Lovecraft's influences on media, or at least the ones that I've noticed. But we haven't really addressed card games. There is a direct adaptation of several Lovecraft stories in the Call of Cthulhu card game, even including the related Hastur, or the King of Yellow mythos, which was not created by Lovecraft, but happily included into the extended mythos with his blessing. But Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Hearthstone all had a set of Lovecraft-inspired cards released in a short period of time, from Eldritch Moon, to the Elder Entities, to the Whispers of the Old Gods. Next week, we return to card games.
And as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.